I showed up at my daughter's wedding dressed like I had nothing left. People thought I was homeless, and when my daughter finally realized it was me, she turned her face away. Before I begin, tell me in the comments where in the world you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. And if stories like this stay with you, please like and subscribe. It really helps me continue sharing the truths I've carried for years. I'm glad you're here, because this isn't a story about revenge dressed up as drama. It's about a mother who reached the point where pretending to be invisible felt easier than begging to be seen. The wedding took place on a warm Saturday afternoon in late spring, at a vineyard just outside Napa Valley. White chairs lined the grass. Soft music floated through speakers hidden behind rose bushes. Everything was tasteful, expensive, and carefully planned, right down to the way guests were instructed where to park and when to arrive. I arrived early, not because I was eager, but because I didn't want anyone watching me come in. I parked far from the entrance and sat in my car for a long time, hands resting on the steering wheel, staring at my reflection in the cracked rearview mirror. I barely recognized myself. My hair was unwashed, pulled back loosely. My clothes were laid, oversized, worn. I had practiced this look carefully, not messy enough to be theatrical, but worn enough that no one would question it. I stepped out of the car and felt the weight of every eye almost immediately. Not because anyone knew who I was, but because no one did. People glanced at me, then quickly looked away. Some frowned. A few whispered. I caught fragments of words. Lost. Staff. Maybe she wandered in. No one asked if I needed help. No one asked me to leave either. I existed in that uncomfortable space where people pretend not to notice, and that hurt more than I expected. I wasn't always like this. I used to be the mother people admired, the one who packed lunches with handwritten notes, the one who never missed a school play or a late-night phone call, the one who worked 2 jobs quietly so my daughter, Emily, could grow up believing the world was generous. Emily was my only child, my miracle baby. I raised her alone after her father left before she turned 3. I never told her how many nights I cried into the sink so she wouldn't hear. I never told her how many times I skipped meals so she could eat better than I did. I just loved her, fully, without conditions, which is why standing there, uninvited in spirit, unnoticed in body, felt like standing at my own funeral. I watched guests arrive in elegant dresses and tailored suits. Laughter rang out easily. Champagne glasses clinked. Everyone looked exactly the way weddings are supposed to look on social media. Perfect. Polished. Untouched by doubt. And then I saw her. Emily stepped out from behind the venue doors, radiant in white. Her hair was styled the way I used to braid it when she was little, except now someone else had done it. Someone professional. Someone paid. She laughed at something her bridesmaid said, head thrown back, carefree. For a moment, I forgot why I was there. For a moment, I was just her mother again, wanting to run forward and fix the tiny crease in her dress strap. Then her eyes passed over me. She didn't recognize me. Not at first. Her gaze moved from face to face, greeting guests, smiling automatically. When it reached me, it paused, just for half a second. Confusion flickered. Discomfort followed. Then her eyes slid away, as if I was something she wasn't prepared to deal with. That was when I knew. Whatever distance had grown between us over the past 2 years wasn't accidental. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a choice. I stayed where I was. I didn't wave. I didn't call her name. I let her believe, just for a little while longer, that I was nobody. Because before I could face her as her mother, I needed to understand why she had stopped seeing me as one. And as the music shifted and guests began taking their seats, I realized this wedding wasn't just the start of her marriage. It was the moment everything between us would finally come into the open. Before everything fractured, our life was simple in a way that only looks small when you're standing far away from it. Emily and I lived in a modest 2-bedroom house in Sacramento, the kind with thin walls and a backyard that never quite grew grass evenly. I worked as an administrative assistant for a medical supply company. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills and gave me health insurance, which mattered more to me than titles ever did. Our mornings followed a rhythm we'd kept for years. Coffee brewing before sunrise, the radio murmuring the news, Emily padding into the kitchen half awake when she was younger, hair sticking up in impossible directions. When she was a child, she used to sit on the counter while I packed her lunch, swinging her legs and telling me everything she dreamed the night before. Even as a teenager, when silence became more common, she still lingered in the doorway before leaving for school, as if she wanted to say something but didn't know how. I noticed those pauses. I always did. We weren't perfect, but we were close. Or at least, I believed we were. I was the parent she called when her car wouldn't start. The one she texted when she couldn't sleep. The one she came home to after her first heartbreak, eyes swollen, voice shaking, asking if it was normal to feel hollow. I told her yes. I told her feelings pass. I told her she was strong. When she met Daniel, everything shifted gently at first, like furniture being moved one piece at a time. She was 26 then, working in marketing, excited about her future. Daniel was charming, confident, well-spoken. He came from money, not flashy wealth, but the kind that shows up in subtle ways. Good teeth, no student loans, stories about family vacations that sounded like magazine spreads. I tried to like him. I really did. At dinners, he was polite but distant with me. Always respectful, never warm. He called me Mrs. Carter long after I asked him to use my first name. When Emily talked, he listened, but when I spoke, his eyes drifted toward his phone, the television, anywhere but me. I told myself I was imagining it, that I was being overly protective. Mothers do that sometimes. Emily started visiting less often. Not dramatically, just enough that I noticed. Holidays were split. Phone calls became shorter. She stopped asking for advice and started informing me of decisions after they'd already been made. Still, when she called to tell me they were engaged, I cried. Not quiet tears, the kind that shake your chest and leave you gasping. I told her how happy I was. I told her I couldn't wait to help plan everything. I told her she'd be a beautiful bride. She thanked me. Her voice was warm, but different, like she was speaking through glass. Wedding planning moved quickly, and I wasn't as involved as I'd expected. Emily said Daniel's parents had strong opinions. Venues were chosen before I saw them, dresses before I weighed in. Even the guest list seemed controlled. When I asked gentle questions, she reassured me, told me not to worry, told me everything was under control. I tried to believe her. I filled my time with small things, looking up centerpiece ideas, bookmarking bakeries, saving dresses I thought she'd love. Sometimes I sent her links. Most of the time, she didn't respond. The house grew quieter without me realizing it. I ate dinners alone more often. The radio stayed on just for noise. Some nights I caught myself setting 2 plates before remembering there was no one else coming home. The first time I felt something truly wrong was 3 months before the wedding. I called Emily after work, just to hear her voice. She answered quickly, but her tone shifted the moment she realized it was me. Is everything okay? I asked. Yes, she said. Too fast. I'm just busy. There was a pause. I almost hung up. Then I asked, carefully, do you still want me there early on the wedding day? To help you get ready? Another pause. Longer this time. I'll let you know, she said. Daniel's mom has most of that covered. That night, I sat at my kitchen table long after the dishes were done, staring at my phone. I told myself this was normal, that daughters grow up, that families change. But somewhere deep inside, a quiet thought surfaced, one I didn't want to hear yet. I wondered if, without realizing it, I had already been written out of her life. The doubt didn't arrive all at once. It crept in slowly, disguising itself as coincidence, timing, misunderstandings I kept excusing because the alternative felt too painful to consider. It started with the invitations. Emily had promised I'd see one before they went out, just to make sure names were spelled correctly, addresses right. When the envelopes finally arrived in my mailbox, weeks later than expected, mine looked exactly like everyone else's. No note, no handwritten touch, just my name printed neatly, without even the word Mom anywhere on it. I stood in the doorway holding that envelope for a long time, thumb tracing the edge. It felt silly to be hurt by paper. Still, I was. Inside, my seat was listed in the general guest section. Not family, not front rows, just a seat. I told myself seating charts change. I told myself I was being sensitive. Then came the dress fitting. Emily had mentioned it once in passing, said she was excited, said her bridesmaids would be there. I waited for an invitation that never came. The day of the fitting, I saw photos online instead. Emily glowing in white satin, surrounded by women I barely recognized, Daniel's mother front and center, hand clasped dramatically over her heart. I stared at those photos longer than I should have. When I finally called Emily that evening, she sounded distracted. "Oh, that was today," I said lightly, pretending. "Yes," she replied. "It was kind of last minute." "I would have loved to be there," I said, still gentle. Another pause. "I know," she said. "It just worked out this way." After we hung up, I sat on the edge of my bed and tried to understand how something could work out in a way that always excluded me. The real shift happened 2 weeks later. I stopped by Emily's apartment unannounced. I hadn't done that in years, but something inside me felt restless, unsettled. I brought soup, her favorite, the kind I used to make when she was sick. I told myself I was being thoughtful. When she opened the door, her smile froze for just a fraction of a second. "Oh," she said. "Hi." Inside, Daniel was there, along with his mother, Linda. Papers were spread across the table, vendor contracts, seating charts, guest lists, planning, all the things I thought I wasn't needed for. Linda looked up at me, startled, then polite. "We weren't expecting you," she said. "I can see that," I replied softly. Emily didn't meet my eyes. I offered the soup, suddenly unsure of my hands. Linda thanked me and placed it aside without opening it. Daniel nodded once, already turning back to the papers. No one asked me to sit. I stood there for a moment too long, then said I wouldn't interrupt. As I turned to leave, I caught a glimpse of the seating chart. Emily's name and Daniel's was centered at the head table. Daniel's parents were listed beside them. Mine wasn't anywhere near. That night, sleep wouldn't come. I replayed every interaction, every brushed-off moment. I wondered when my presence had become inconvenient instead of comforting. The next morning, I finally asked the question I'd been avoiding. I called Emily and said, "Did I do something wrong?" Silence filled the line. Not technical silence, breathing, faint background noise, but emotional distance so thick it felt like a wall. "No," she said finally. "It's not like that." "Then what is it like?" I asked. She exhaled slowly. "You worry too much. You make things heavy." Heavy. That word stayed with me all day. Later that week, I received an email from the wedding planner. It was polite, professional, and not meant for me. The subject line read, "Final guest coordination, immediate family adjustments." I don't know how it ended up in my inbox. A forwarding mistake, maybe. Or fate. I opened it with shaking hands that IT detailed last-minute changes requested by the groom's family. Adjustments to seating. Access to the bridal suite. Security notes. And one line, buried halfway down, stopped my breath completely. Bride has requested limited interaction with mother prior to ceremony to reduce stress. I reread it again. And again. Limited interaction. Reduce stress. I closed my laptop and sat in silence, the house pressing in around me. That was the moment I stopped pretending this was accidental. That was the moment I realized I had been carefully, deliberately moved to the margins. Not because I was absent, but because I was in the way. And as painful as that realization was, something else settled in with it. A quiet resolve I didn't yet fully understand. If my presence caused her stress, then maybe my absence would finally tell me the truth. And that thought, that dangerous, desperate thought, was what led me to make the decision that changed everything. Once the truth cracks open, it doesn't rush out all at once. It leaks, slow, relentless, soaking into places you didn't know could hurt. After that email, I stopped calling Emily. Not out of spite, but because I needed space to think without being told I was too much. Days passed, then a week. She didn't reach out either. The silence between us hardened into something solid, something real. I started noticing things I'd ignored before. Daniel's mother, Linda, had always been polite, but there was a precision to her kindness that now felt calculated. Compliments that sounded like evaluations. Questions that felt like tests. She once told me, smiling tightly, that Emily was stepping into a much bigger world now. I hadn't challenged it then. I heard it differently now. A few days later, I received a call from my sister, Karen, who lived in Oregon. She sounded hesitant, the way people do when they know they are about to say something that can't be taken back. I probably shouldn't get involved, she said, but I saw something online. She forwarded me a link to a private wedding forum, one of those invitation-only planning groups. I don't know how she gained access. Maybe a mutual friend. Maybe curiosity. Inside were posts from Linda. Long ones. She wrote about family dynamics and maintaining appearances. About how some relatives don't adapt well to elevated environments. About the importance of protecting the bride's emotional space from old patterns. She never used my name. She didn't have to. Then I saw Emily's replies. Sure. Agreeable. Careful. You're right. I just want the day to be peaceful. I trust your judgment. Each message felt like a small erasure. I closed my laptop and cried in a way I hadn't since Emily was a baby. Quiet, restrained sobs, the kind you swallow because no one is there to hear them anyway. But grief wasn't the worst part. It was the understanding. I hadn't been pushed out because I was harmful. I had been inconvenient. I didn't fit the image they were crafting. I was the reminder of where Emily came from. Single mother, tight budgets, second-hand furniture, sacrifices that didn't photograph well. I was the past she was being encouraged to outgrow. 2 days later, Emily called. Her voice was careful, measured. Mom, she said, I heard you've been upset. I almost laughed. I'm not upset, I replied. I'm aware. She sighed. You're taking things personally. Am I? I asked. Or am I finally seeing clearly? There was a pause. I could hear Daniel in the background, his voice low, indistinct. Emily spoke again. I just need you to understand that this wedding is very important to Daniel's family. And I'm not. I asked quietly. That's not what I meant. But it was what she meant. After we hung up, I sat in my car for a long time, gripping the steering wheel, breathing through the tightness in my chest. I wasn't angry yet. I was hollow. The lowest moment came the following week, when I received another message, this time directly from Linda. It was cordial, almost kind. She wrote that Emily had been overwhelmed, and that perhaps it would be best if I arrived closer to the ceremony time. That too much involvement could trigger emotional fatigue. She suggested I take care of myself and enjoy the day from a comfortable distance. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. This wasn't protection. This was exile. That night, I pulled out old photo albums. Emily at 6, missing her front teeth, grinning. Emily at 12, awkward and unsure. Emily at 19, proud and tired, holding her first apartment keys. I wondered when my presence had stopped being a foundation and started being a liability. I slept poorly. I stopped eating properly. I lost weight without trying. People at work asked if I was okay. I smiled and said yes. Inside, I felt erased. And then, somewhere in the middle of that quiet devastation, a thought formed, clear and sharp. If they believed I didn't belong in their world, then maybe the only way to understand why was to step fully outside of it. Not as her mother, not as family, but as someone they would never expect. The idea scared me at first. It felt extreme, unstable, but the more I sat with it, the calmer I became. Because I was done begging to be included. If they wanted me invisible, I would show them exactly what that looked like. And in that resolve, at my absolute lowest point, I finally felt something else return. Control. Once I stopped trying to explain myself, everything became quieter. Not peaceful, just still. Like the moment before a storm when the air feels too heavy to move. I didn't reply to Linda's message. I didn't call Emily. I went to work, smiled at coworkers, answered emails, live my days on autopilot. But inside, something had shifted. The hurt was still there, deep and aching, but it no longer ruled me. At night, I planned. Not in a dramatic way. No lists of revenge. No speeches rehearsed in mirrors. Just quiet thoughts, returning again and again, until they felt less like ideas and more like inevitabilities. I kept asking myself one question. What do I need to know? I didn't want to embarrass Emily. Despite everything, I still loved her. I didn't want to ruin her wedding. What I wanted, what I needed, was truth. I needed to see, without filters or excuses, how she behaved when she thought I wasn't watching. That was when the idea finally settled. If I arrived at the wedding not as her mother, but as someone easily overlooked, I would see things clearly. I would hear the comments people didn't think mattered. I would understand whether I was being excluded out of stress or out of shame. The plan formed quietly. I chose clothes I already owned but never wore together. Worn shoes, a coat too big, layers that suggested necessity, not choice. I practiced softening my posture, lowering my gaze. I avoided eye contact when I went to the grocery store, testing how people reacted when I made myself smaller. They barely noticed me. That realization hurt more than I expected, but it also hardened something inside me. I thought about Emily constantly during those days, about the little girl who used to hold my hand too tightly in crowded places, about how she used to get embarrassed if I hugged her in front of friends, but would still smile afterward. I asked myself where I'd gone wrong. Had I loved her too fiercely, protected her too much, failed to teach her how to stand up for herself when other people tried to rewrite her story? I accepted my part in it. I had made myself available always. I had smoothed over discomfort instead of naming it. I had taught her that my feelings could wait. That was on me. But what came next? That was my choice. The morning of the wedding, I woke before dawn. I showered, slowly, deliberately. I tied my hair back. I looked at myself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked tired, smaller, older. I whispered, "You're still her mother," just to hear the words. Then I left as I drove toward the venue. My heart pounded harder with every mile. I considered turning back more than once. This plan felt dangerous, not physically, but emotionally. I was walking into a place where I might confirm my worst fears. But I kept driving. When I parked far from the venue, I sat in my car and breathed. In, out. I reminded myself why I was there. Not to be seen, not to be forgiven, just to understand. As I walked onto the grounds, people glanced at me and looked away. Some frowned. A few whispered. No one asked who I was. And that told me everything. I stayed near the edges, blending into the background. I listened. I heard Daniel's aunt complain about seating. I heard someone joke about keeping things classy. I heard Linda say, laughing lightly, that everything was much simpler this way. That was when I knew. This wasn't about stress, or timing, or misunderstandings. This was about control. Emily had been guided, slowly, carefully, toward a version of herself that required me to be smaller, quieter, absent. And as painful as that truth was, it also clarified something else. If Emily was going to choose that world, she deserved to see what it cost. Not through confrontation, but through recognition. As the music began to shift and guests took their seats, I felt a strange calm settle over me. I was ready, not for revenge, for revelation. Because sometimes the only way to be seen is to first become invisible. And somewhere inside, I knew the moment was coming, the moment when my daughter would finally look at me and see what she had almost lost. The ceremony was about to begin when everything finally collided. Music swelled softly from the speakers, and guests settled into their seats. I stood near the back, half hidden by a tall floral arrangement, my hands clasped in front of me to keep them from shaking. My heart was beating fast now, not from fear, but from certainty. Emily appeared at the entrance, framed by light. For a moment, the world seemed to pause. People stood, heads turned, cameras lifted. She took one step forward, then another. Her eyes scanned the crowd instinctively, landing on familiar faces. Friends, family, Daniel's parents. She smiled automatically, the way people do when they are following a plan too closely to deviate. Then her gaze reached me. This time, she didn't look away. Her step slowed, just slightly, enough that I noticed, enough that the woman beside her whispered something, confused. Emily frowned. She tilted her head, studying me, not recognizing me yet, but sensing something wrong. Her eyes moved over my coat, my hair, my posture, and then understanding hit. Her face changed, color drained from it. Her smile collapsed. She stopped walking. The music faltered, barely, as if the person controlling it sensed the shift in the air. Emily's eyes filled with tears. "Mom," she whispered. It wasn't loud. No one else heard it. But I did. That single word landed harder than anything else that day. People around her murmured. Daniel turned to look at her, then followed her gaze toward me. Confusion crossed his face. Linda stiffened beside him, her expression tightening instantly. Emily took a step toward me. Linda's hand shot out, gripping her arm. "Not now," she murmured, urgent. "You'll ruin your makeup." Emily shook her off. The moment stretched thin, fragile. I didn't move. I didn't wave. I didn't step forward to rescue her from the discomfort she had helped create. I stayed exactly where I was, visible, but not intruding. Emily's breath hitched. She looked around, at the guests, at the altar, at the life she was stepping into, and then back at me. And in her eyes, I saw it. Recognition, not just of me, but of what she had done. She walked toward me slowly, her dress brushing the grass, the crowd parting instinctively. Whispers followed. Cameras lowered. This wasn't part of the script. She stopped in front of me. "Why are you dressed like this?" she asked quietly, her voice shaking. I met her eyes. For the first time in months, I didn't soften my expression to protect her. "Because I was told to keep my distance," I said. "Calm, even." This seemed appropriate. Her mouth opened, closed. Daniel approached, clearly uncomfortable. "Is there a problem?" he asked. Emily didn't answer him. Linda did. "This is not the time," she said sharply. "You should leave." I looked at her then. Really looked. "I was invited," I said. "I just wasn't expected." Silence fell. Heavy. Unavoidable. Emily's shoulders slumped. Tears spilled freely now, tracing lines down her cheeks. "I didn't want you to feel bad," she whispered. "I just wanted things to be easy." I nodded slowly. "I know," I said. "That's why I needed to see you like this." Her brows knit together. "See me how?" "Choosing," I replied. The word hung between us. Emily turned toward the altar, then back to me. The guests were fully aware now. This wasn't drama. This was truth. She took my hands. "I'm sorry," she said. "I let them tell me who I needed to be." Linda gasped softly. Daniel looked stunned. Emily straightened. "She's my mother," she said, louder now. "And she's sitting with family." Without waiting for permission, she led me to the front row. Chairs shifted. People moved. Space was made. Linda's face hardened, but she said nothing. As Emily returned to her place at the altar, she looked back at me once more. Not embarrassed, grateful. The ceremony resumed. Vows were exchanged. Applause followed. But everything had changed. Because in that moment, when she chose me in front of everyone, the truth had been spoken without a single scream. And it echoed louder than any argument ever could. After the ceremony ended, the applause faded into conversation, and the tight knot in my chest finally began to loosen. Not disappear, just soften, enough that I could breathe again. Emily didn't rush away with her new husband the way I expected. Instead, she came straight to me, her dress gathered in one hand, mascara smudged beneath her eyes. She looked young again in that moment. Not the polished bride. Just my daughter. "I didn't plan that," she said quietly. "I know," I replied. We stood there for a moment, unsure what to do with our hands, our words. Around us, people pretended not to watch, though everyone was. Linda stayed on the opposite side of the room, stiff and smiling, speaking to guests with practiced ease. I didn't realize how far I'd let things go, Emily said. It just happened. I nodded. That's usually how it does. At the reception, my place card was suddenly rewritten. Someone added my name to the family table with a quick hand, as if it had always been meant to be there. The gesture was small, but it mattered. Daniel came over later, awkward but sincere. I didn't understand what was happening, he admitted. I should have paid more attention. I accepted his apology without enthusiasm or anger, just honesty. The rest of the evening unfolded gently. Emily laughed again, real laughter this time. She danced. She ate cake. She leaned toward me once, resting her head briefly on my shoulder, the way she used to when she was tired. Linda never approached me. She didn't need to. Her power that day had already slipped. In the weeks that followed, things didn't magically fix themselves. Healing never works that way. But Emily called more often. She asked questions, real ones, about my life, about my feelings. Once, she said, "I forgot how strong you are." I smiled at that. I went back to my routines. Work, groceries, quiet dinners. But something inside me felt steadier. I had stopped shrinking myself to make others comfortable. Emily and I began rebuilding, not as mother and child frozen in old roles, but as two women learning how to see each other again. What was lost couldn't be fully recovered. Some trust takes time. Some wounds leave scars. But we were honest now, and that made all the difference. Sometimes, love isn't about holding tighter. Sometimes, it's about standing still long enough for the other person to finally see you. And I was finally seen. In the months after the wedding, life settled into something quieter than before, but also more real. Emily didn't suddenly turn into the daughter I remembered from years ago, and I didn't expect her to. People grow. They change. They make choices that don't always include us the way we hoped they would. But what changed was the honesty between us. She stopped editing herself when she talked to me. She told me when she felt overwhelmed instead of pushing me away. I stopped pretending that being easy was the same as being supportive. I learned that silence can look like love, but feel like abandonment. One afternoon, while we were having coffee together, Emily said something that stayed with me. I think I was afraid that if people saw where I came from, they'd judge where I was going. I reached across the table and held her hand. "Where you came from is what made you capable of going anywhere," I told her. She cried then. Not the quiet, contained kind of crying, but the kind that releases something old and heavy. I realized something in that moment too. I had spent years teaching my daughter how to survive, how to adapt, how to endure, but I hadn't taught her how to protect the people who loved her when new worlds tried to rewrite her past. That wasn't a failure. It was just a lesson that arrived later than expected. If there's one thing I want you to take from my story, it's this. Love doesn't disappear when it's pushed aside, but it does remember how it was treated. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't fighting to be included. It's standing exactly where you are and letting the truth reveal itself. Did you like my story? Please like and subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I want to know how far this story of mine travels. And here is the truth I carry now, lighter than before. You don't have to make yourself smaller to keep the people you love. The ones meant to stay will recognize you, even when you stand quietly in plain sight.